call the Planning Commission meeting of whatever, the June meeting back to order. We just, we did not adjourn the meeting, we just continued it, so we're resuming that meeting. We have one item on our agenda this evening, and that is the renewable energy, I guess the solar and to some extent wind ordinance language. A couple of administrative matters. One, perhaps Ms. Summers can elaborate on this, but I believe the language that was voted on has already been noticed. So I don't think we're in a position this evening to change the language in the ordinance that is posted. And could you please confirm that?
That's correct, sir. The notice has already been given for the joint public hearing.
So I know we went around on this bit last time, so I don't want that to constrain the discussion in any way this evening, but I want folks to recognize that if, to the extent that we get into any specific wording changes, what we are essentially doing is proposing language that we might add after the public hearing. So that's unfortunately an awkward administrative spot we're in. So my preference this evening would be to try to spend as much time as we can on sort of the higher level principles around this and not try to get into wordsmithing the actual ordinance language, although I understand that's a hard temptation to resist along the way, but that's just my recommendation as we go into the discussion. And I know through email traffic and some of the discussions I've had with individuals that folks have been doing their homework and trying to get educated about this, looking at some of the other ordinances, looking at some of the studies that have been done. So, you know, first of all, I appreciate everybody's efforts to do that. And I think what I was hoping we would do tonight, and I'm open to suggestions. Oh, okay. So we do have, good evening, Mr. Sklar. Oh. We do have our special guest joining us.
Let's try this again. Can you hear us?
So Gary, maybe you should see the chairman.
Using Granada.
Hang on.
Granada?
Trying to get my.
Was that unexpected?
Okay. We're trying to be able to hear you.
Oh, okay.
Here we go.
There you are. We can hear you. So, good evening, Mr. Sklar. Is it Sklar? I'm sorry. Yes. Well, nice to meet you. I'm Gary Light. I'm the vice chairman of the Rappahannock County Planning Commission. And for your benefit and for others who might be wondering, I'm chairing tonight's work session because our chairman, Keir Whitson, is out of town. So I appreciate your joining us. I wasn't 100% sure that you would be able to join us. So I was just sort of teeing up the conversation, and we will ask for your remarks. I don't quite know what arrangement Mr. Curry made. I know he shared the draft ordinance language, and I saw some email traffic. So what I was just starting to do is explain my view of how we actually conduct the meeting tonight to keep this from just being a free-for-all. So,
Before you know, he did share the language, and I made comments on that language to him.
okay, I did see that in the form of in the form of an email. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what I was thinking we would do is first perhaps just go around and give each of the commissioners a chance to provide their, a brief assessment of where they feel we are and what their results of their research perhaps has shown and where they think we should head on this. Again, I would prefer that we keep it at a high level rather than trying to wordsmith this thing, but you it'll be your time in the spotlight. So I thought after we do that, then what we can do is actually walk through the draft language as is written. I think one of the benefits of it feels like we're not being productive, whichever comes first. So that's how I'd like to run the meeting, if that's all right. So everybody okay with that program?
Yes, sir.
All right. So with that, why don't I start? Sorry, Mr. Schulin, I know you've done some work on this. Why don't I start down at your end and give you kind of an opportunity for opening remarks or suggestions on where you think we are on this thing.
Well, the more I looked into solar, the more I realized how little I knew and still know. It's amazing how technical this is. And I was doing some research into the Virginia Clean Economy Act, which it seems to be one of the driving forces behind this push for green renewable energy in Virginia. And I just wanted to find simple answers to simple questions. And I was so frustrating to find. It's very difficult to find the answer to simple questions like, how much energy do Virginians consume in a year? Or just an average household. Everything seemed to be rankings, how we compare with other states in production and usage. I'm trying to figure out how to go 100% green by 2050, how many tens of thousands of acres of forest and open space need to be consumed to achieve that goal. And I can't find the missing pieces of information to do simple calculations. It's very frustrating.
Well, that's why you have me on this call. 'Cause
Excellent.
I teach at George Washington University.
Well, I appreciate that. One of my biggest concerns that I kind of saw addressed in Clark County's zoning ordinances was they require an economic impact study, which I found to be quite interesting. They asked one of the criteria for the special use is they need to provide an economic cost benefit analysis describing the generated property taxes, sales taxes, other taxes, construction dollars spent locally, estimated construction jobs and construction payroll, permanent jobs and continuing payroll, and all the costs associated with impact on roads and other county infrastructure in the area. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns in Rappahannock County is knowing that if a solar farm comes into Rappahannock, the only benefit that I see countywide is the taxes generated through change in use, real estate taxes, and maybe business property taxes on the equipment itself. And of course, a nice steady income to landowner themselves. no one sees their utility bill go down one dime. That electricity is just shipped off somewhere else. Our grid's not set up that way to help support our usage of electricity. And I thought this was kind of an interesting way of making them show you that there is a benefit to having, for having to bear the burden of destroying farmland or forests for solar fields. And last month's county, summer 2021, Country Zest Style magazine, there was an interesting article about open space versus solar power. And it's kind of interesting because it kind of pits green tree huggers against one another, because one group might want green energy, the other side wants green open spaces. It's kind of hard to have both. But that's kind of my thoughts on it right now.
Thank you. And again, with apologies for the kind of fluidity of the agenda, and with respect to Mr. Sklar, if you are prepared to make some remarks, I didn't want to put you on the spot unnecessarily, but
I'm happy to make some.
Okay.
Just so you all know, I've been in the field about over 40 years. National Lab, I ran the Solar Trade Association for 15 years. I have a 21-year-old owners rep company, which guides local governments, U.S. military, infrastructure like cell towers, data center companies, and commercial industrial on utilizing all the renewable technologies, not just solar, and energy efficiency and energy storage like batteries. I teach 3 interdisciplinary courses on sustainable energy, 3 different types of courses at the George Washington University. I am the energy director of their Environmental Energy Management Institute at the university, and I teach seminars at Fort McNair, at National Defense University, and the Industrial College of the Armed Forces. I have no interest in any technology, company, or project. That's what an owner's rep is. It's sort of like a lawyer or an accountant. So anyway, to start up and be very, very brief, I don't want to waste your time. Since 2017, more new electricity coming on the U.S. electric grid every year is renewable energy, more than natural gas, and of course, coal and nuclear really isn't coming online. So it's really been quite cost effective. It is financed through either power purchase agreements, leasing, or shared savings contracts. In all cases, the end user does not pay for the project. The private sector does. They sign a 20-year or 25-year contract for the power. The power is less than what you buy from the electric utility company, so everybody makes money and it's clean. So that's generally and that's true with solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, medium hydro, waste heat. Those are the different renewables. Battery storage is now, particularly for the variable renewables, solar and wind, being integrated with projects so it has 24-hour capacity, just like a natural gas plant. And in the west of the country, where you have drier weather and better sunlight, it's less expensive than natural gas plants for 24-hour renewable energy. And in the East Coast, it's about even. Nice part about the renewables, they don't use water. So as you know, the West has the high droughts. And so you're producing electrons without water. And that's very important for a good part of the country. The solar side, which you're looking at, obviously makes a lot of sense on a building. And by the way, I have 2 buildings in Arlington, Virginia, my office building, a 2-story building, and also my home, which are totally self-powered by blends of solar, other renewables, and battery storage. I don't take any electricity from the grid. And of course, I'm doing that at a lot of military bases as well. It's much more reliable on the grid, it's cleaner power quality, and I never have an outage. So it makes a lot of sense on buildings, on corporate and institutional campuses like government campuses or hospitals, where you're putting it on building roofs or on the ground near the building. Parking lots are really great because they basically have canopies over the cars, and so you don't get rained or snowed on. So there's a lot of land where we are in brownfields, closed industrial plants, where solar makes a lot of sense and you're not giving up the quality of the land. In your case of a county, obviously there's a lot of interest in keeping your view shed and your nature of the forest and the ag land. As for agriculture, there's been a big move going on and over the last few years on what's called agri-photovoltaics. And basically what that really means is we're putting up the ground-mounted solar panels much higher, about 15 to 20 feet over the ground. And it allows you to crop underneath the panels or have animal husbandry like cattle underneath the panels, and it's really works very well. Then you can continue the farming and at the same time get the energy. There's some crops like lettuce and other things where direct sunlight actually is not ideal. So you can orchestrate the panels layout so you get shafts of sunlight but not harsh sunlight for certain crops. For animals, we're finding in the big cattle ranches that about 40% of the diseases is overexposure to sun, and so the cattle or the sheep or the alpacas or whatever else is under the panels, they tend to congregate where it's shady. They have less diseases. So one of my suggestions in the language is if you're going to allow farmland to have solar, don't have it low, so that means you can't farm on it. Demand that it's higher up so that you have the option to farm under it. If you don't want to farm under it, in all cases, it should be a requirement to plant native grasses and shrubs which attract bees and butterflies and keeps the biodiversity going and prevents also under torrential rain movement of mud. We've had some instances of mud under these large ground-mounted systems where they don't have a ground cover. So that was one of my suggestions to you. So on the agri-photovoltaics, I think you get around some of these problems. And on forests, I also believe, from the first speaker, that I don't believe in giving up prime forest land for solar. And I'm a big solar advocate. Having greenery and trees and taking in the carbon is as important as making zero carbon electricity. So, I understand what the language is trying to do here is create a smart balance so you can have some green energy production, which is important, but at the same time, preserve the view shed and make sure that you maintain an agricultural character on parts of the land, and I think we can do it with a smart use of how we craft the language. So I'll end there, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I probably have more studies on these technologies than probably anyone around.
Well, thank you very much for that. I think that was very helpful and concise and to the point, and I appreciate it. And I think I will perhaps modify the earlier plan and go back to my colleagues here and open up the floor to them for questions, if anyone would like to ask them of Mr. Sklar at this time.
I have a question. This is Rick Kohler.
Can you hear him, Mr. Sklar?
So far I can,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Is there a requirement that the county allow a solar industry into the waters?
it depends what you mean by that. If there's an absolute zero allowance of solar, no, you can't do it. That's a restraint of trade. But what I understand is that there's not a lot of pushback on putting it on buildings or around buildings on property. It's really the larger projects that you're trying to craft. And the way this language is being considered is that it's trying to create certain criteria of what would be allowed, and you are allowed to create that criteria. And so that's that. But an outright ban, no, you're not.
Oh, thank you. Go ahead.
I have one question.
Please.
When you're talking about batteries, is that always or typically an aspect of the solar?
I didn't hear the last part of your sentence.
Is that always or typically included, the storage?
No, in the last 4 or 5 years, it's becoming more common. About a third of the large projects now include batteries, but many of them don't. And it's really the deal they can strike with the utility company on how much they can take in, what their wires can hold. What's really good about batteries is that if the wires can't take the power at midday when you're trying to push them on the power line, you can hold it and let it out later in the day when there's more room. It overcomes what's called voltage line congestion. So, and of course, utilities like batteries because it's treated like a regular, natural gas turbine. It could call on the power anytime. So it gives it much more flexibility than just mid-morning to early evening when the sun's out. So, but no, the projects can be with or without batteries, but again, they still have to strike a deal. If it's not tied to an end user like an industrial or commercial or homeowner, then it's with the utility. And the utility has to want that power and be able to utilize that power.
If I could maybe ask a follow-up question to that. Given the growing commonality of storage, when that's treated in an ordinance such as the one we've drafted here, I mean, we haven't discussed storage at all explicitly, and I guess I'm wondering if in your experience, the battery storage is kind of its own, regulated entity from a local standpoint, or is it just kind of rolled into the aspects of the solar?
Yeah, it's usually rolled in the aspects of solar. The battery storage looks like it's in shipping container kind of covering. The batteries are not exposed to the elements, so it's usually right next to the solar electric panels. Solar electric produces DC electricity, and of course we have to change it to AC electricity, and we use inverters to do that. They are also large electronic devices, and usually the batteries are right there next to that inverter before it goes up onto the power line. So, they're generally, some of them are huge, of course, but in most cases it's just having, 10, 15, 20 shipping containers of different sizes at the connection point to the power lines, or to the buildings if you look at for industrial or commercial.
So what is the annual output or production of, an acre of ground, or what would be a unit that you would look at in this area?
Well, things vary, and in your area particularly, you have a problem because of you have some sort of hills and mountains and forests, and of course a lot of that blocks out sunlight to it, and of course you have in the east you have that. So basically, these days first of all, the solar farms, they rent somewhere between $200 to $2,500 an acre a year to go on land. So that's why a lot of farmers like to have some of their acreage tied up in either wind turbines or solar farms. And so that's been a real income producer, particularly in the Midwest. Wind is the second largest income for farmers after farming itself. So, so that's pretty key here, and that's why it tends to be an interest to do that, because as you know, farm income has been creeping lower, and and depending on where you are in Virginia, you have doing it. So basically, you have 5 to 10 acres per megawatt of electric generation. So that's it. So I think in Virginia would be close to 10 acres per megawatt.
And that's under peak conditions, or is that on average
That's that's at noon.
at
Now
noon?
the hour, noon to 1. That's what you're getting out of it.
So today, that might be,
You have a nice
The peak.
curve. The sun starting about 9:30 to 10:30. You're starting to produce power, and that's going to last for most of the year till about 4, and it's going to start coming down around that time. Summertime, of course, your light's longer, so that curve will be higher and broader in the summertime. And I can send you charts on that. So, the power curves are really on that. Of what I've seen, if we maximize solar just on rooftops, we could meet about 1/3 of the electricity in Virginia used during the day. So that's a huge amount of power.
Anyone else have questions?
A megawatt will serve how many houses?
Well, that's also, an interesting thing, because it really depends on where you are and how big your houses are. In North Arlington here, we tend to have much bigger houses, I would expect. It's basically about 200 homes.
Second question, two more questions. How important is it, from what I've understood, it's very important that any solar development will be located close to 3-phase electric lines to transport it.
Yeah, well, you want to be close to transmission lines. That's correct. For a big solar farm we're talking about, where you're producing megawatts, you need it to be able to offtake that power at a higher power threshold, and that's really along the transmission lines or at the substation in some cases. So yes, you need to do that, and a lot of projects are killed because the power line connection is just too far away. It's very expensive to run high voltage lines, across open land to the power line. So you're going to find that most of the developers are going to look for what lines are running through the county and where is open land, and then what. And so that's going to be the first shot, because otherwise then it gets very complicated and expensive.
I haven't heard of any situation where there's any right of condemnation for transmission lines for solar fields. That's not.
No. These are private projects. They cannot only a utility company or a transmission authority can acquire land and go through that process, and even that's not assured. So private developers. And by the way, I want to remind everybody, when I grew up, all power plants were built by utility companies. That's not true anymore. Just under half are built by utility companies. So most power plants are built by the private sector, whether it's a natural gas plant or a solar plant or a wind farm. So in that case, it's the same issue, is that they go to the utility company and say, what do you want power for? And if you sign this 20-year contract, I can build a plant that guarantees you that cost of power. And that's how it's done. The utility doesn't have to go to the ratepayers at all to finance that. The private sector is financing that. So that's what this is. This is the merchant plant model that was really started with coal and natural gas, and now has been moved over to solar and wind, predominantly, geothermal.
So would each solar farm have like its own substation so that it could step up the voltage?
Well, it has its own, it's not called a substation, but yes, it has an inverter that's aligned with the power needs of the transmission line that's being attached to make sure it's symbiotic with the transmission range that needs to go on those power lines. So yes.
What's the largest field in Virginia?
You know, I do not know that. Let me just see. I might know that, but I might have it on my laptop here, so let me see. But I don't know. The largest one in the country at the moment for photovoltaics is 500 megawatts in California. And even that's going to be outdated soon. But out west, you know, with deserts, let's see here.
So would 500 megawatts be 2,500
Yeah,
acres?
that's in California, though. That's not an East Coast.
But would that be 2,500 acres? That would be the largest one in the country?
If I can interrupt for just a second, I think Spotsylvania County has just approved the largest solar energy facility on the East Coast, and that covers 3,500 acres and will produce 500 megawatts of power.
Okay.
Yeah, the one Spotsylvania, I believe, has a 620 megawatt project. So that's all I have. I don't know if that's the largest, but I think it is.
I'll turn to it in a minute, but commissioners, any other questions for the moment?
Hi, Mr. Sklar, this is Mary Catherine Ishii, and I just, in the interest of full disclosure, I've had the pleasure of working in way long ago with Mr. Sklar, so I appreciate his being willing to help us tonight. I have read through a number of things, as I know most of us have. For example, the Piedmont Environmental Council has a fair amount on this, as does, and Mr. Curry sent around some documents from the Alliance for the Shenandoah Valley and also from the Rappahannock Regional Commission. And a lot of their emphasis, certainly Piedmont Environmental Council's emphasis was on the fact that we can produce, and also the Alliance for the Shenandoah Valley, we can produce a great deal of solar energy through rooftop development and on-site development, but also by prioritizing post-mining land, landfills, brownfields, former industrial or commercial sites.
Absolutely right. And by the way, I'm a big believer in that too. The first, if there's a renewable energy policy for solar, it should be rooftops, parking lots, and then what I'll call second-tier lands, which are landfills, brownfields around water and sewage treatment plants, anything like that, where they don't have, this is adding a dual use. This is adding productivity to something that is unproductive economically and making it also more environmental. So there is no doubt the emphasis should be on rooftops or around buildings, parking lots, and then these kinds of second-tier lands like brownfields, closed or abandoned industrial sites or mines, things like that. Absolutely, 100%. And so what the document you have is really focusing on, you're going to go beyond that. What are the rules, what are the restrictions you're going to wrap around any larger development so that it does not interrupt your quality of your county? And I I understand that. I totally understand that. I don't disagree with that. There are ways to do it correctly and ways to do it incorrectly, but as far as trying to do the goal here, I think is a good one.
So that's really helpful too. And I just want to read a short quote from the Alliance for the Shenandoah Valley, which it says that larger facilities in rural areas will play a role in the state's energy mix, but they should not come at the cost of our most productive agricultural lands and existing carbon sinks, forests and soils, nor should they adversely impact important scenic and historic resources that rely upon for tourism. So I guess our issue in Rappahannock County, as I see it, is, are there ways that we can allow, and I agree with what Mr. Schulin said, that I'm not sure that using up our scenic resources, our agricultural lands, or our forested lands, which are already carbon sinks, are so much for the public good, because the amount of energy we're likely to put into the grid is somewhat limited in this county. But we do have benefits to some of our landowners from that development. So I think, at least as I see it, that we're weighing the impacts on our scenic values and tourism and our forested lands and other natural resources against how we, if we can allow landowners to benefit from this. So I'm going to do something dangerous, which lawyers are never supposed to do, which is ask a question I don't know the answer to, but maybe you can tell me, which is, again, quoting from, I think, PEC, the larger the facility, the higher level of difficulty avoiding or mitigating impacts to communities and important natural, cultural, and historic resources. So given that, I think the way we have this language drafted right now, and I know we're not getting into too specific, is that it would be 100-acre size limitation on the facility in a 500-acre parcel, which makes some sense to me. But in your opinion, is it more protective to have a smaller acreage limit or an acreage limit like that?
No, I like that acreage approach. It means it doesn't take all the acreage. It can take part of the acreage. It allows, for instance, farmers to take the unproductive part of their farms to do it, or use it for agri-photovoltaics and create dual usage income on their farms, but not doing the whole farm. I think it's really smart to do it the way it's been drafted. So I have no problem with that. Again, you want to have some flexibility for landowners and farmers to look at where they want, if they want to get the solar income or promote solar energy or do agri-photovoltaics, to select where on their land they're going to do it. And they will not, farmers are not dumb. They're not going to put solar on areas that will destroy their more productive land at all. So I think it will be self-regulating.
I think you're wrong on that point. And the reason you're wrong on that point is the monetary. It seems like in the Shenandoah Valley right now, the typical annual rent per acre is $1,400 per acre. And that's basically net income to the farmer. And that's pretty much guaranteed for the 25-year contract term. So there's no crop that I know of that's going to produce, $1,400 net income per year, and with no corresponding production expenses. So, my experience right now in Shenandoah County, particularly in the Mount Jackson area, is that anybody and everybody is going for the maximum amount of fields that they can get. And there's one particular property there on Turkey Knob Road, Hardy, Virginia, orchards, and they got an operation now, a couple hundred acres, and so at $1,400 an acre, that's gonna.
Well, I'm not sure that will all be able to be held at $1,400 an acre. That seems very high. But that aside, and I've been doing some projects, I haven't seen it that high at all. But anyway, that side. But you have to remember that a lot of farmers are not making money, and so if they're not making money, they want to do as much as they possibly can. You're going to limit that in the language, so they can't do that, and limit it. So at least it brings in some income just not maximum income. But again, from the farm point of view, I mean, I have lots of farmers that just will be selling their farms anyway. It's just not economic anymore, and so that's the issue here. But the farmers that are I work with lots of farmers all over the country. The farmers that are committed to farming and making money at farming generally tend to be more judicious on how they do it, and they optimize the solar or wind to areas that are the less productive, and maximize the rents they can get per acre for those, for those developments. And that's it. So you're providing some constraints, but at least it gives them some options as well.
Yeah, if I may, I think part of the disconnect there is that a lot of the agricultural use here in our area, at least in our county, is not cultivated lands. It's grazing and other uses that
Right.
may be less income producing, but also maybe more compatible with this agri-solar concept, which I think is a very interesting idea. I mean, strikes me that there could be a real synergistic relationship there if we can tap it. I want to try to keep some order here, but I know you had your hand up. Do you have a question, or do you? Yeah, please.
I'd like to know how much it costs for a solar field to produce 1 kilowatt of electricity. I'm paying 14 cents a kilowatt hour. And the county also gets a tremendous tax benefit from the utilities on these that you shouldn't forget. And my whole position last time and this time is this is a very complicated issue. It's far-reaching. I don't think it's prepared in any way for a vote on this ordinance, but I'd be interested in this expert. I talked to a solar guy myself, and he said I'd get about a 14% return on putting in a solar field. I pay $1,000 a month for my house.
Thank you for that. Could you comment on both the sort of investment cost as well as if there are other kind of fiscal impacts that are common locally? I think that's a point that came up earlier. Obviously there's valuations.
All energy is subsidized by the U.S. government in different ways. For solar, you get a 26% investment tax credit for the installed cost of the system. So if you're getting a $10,000 solar system on your home, $2,600 of that can be taken off on your taxes. And if you're not paying that much, it can be carried over in subsequent years. So at any rate, and of course, the investors that invest in the large projects based on the amount of their investment. So if they're putting in $100,000, they're going to be able to write off on their $6,000 on their corporate investment. So that's how this is played. Natural gas gets benefits, and coal, everybody else. It's just we play with the tax code. Thousands of pages. So return on investments are about 14% is about right. Some get 18%, some get 12%, but it's generally a good mid-range, and it's a solid economic activity because there's no moving parts. So unlike you're investing in a turbine, a gas turbine or even a wind turbine, solar has no moving parts, so you don't have too many things going wrong with it. You have squirrels eating wires and some things like that, but generally it's a pretty easy, safe investment.
No goats. I understand the goats are potentially.
That's why you put it up higher. Yes, that's also one of my big deals.
Yes, go ahead, please.
How much is it a kilowatt hour?
Yeah, can you speak to the production cost? I think there's some confusion around this, and maybe you could give us a bit of a primer on the.
It's, for a residential system, it's around 8 cents a kilowatt hour. For the larger utility scale, we're getting around 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's the cost of capital as well. Remember, the bigger it goes, the lower the cost of capital, and therefore you get better deals.
So you're talking about an all-in, like a levelized cost of energy type of measure. Isn't that the
Yeah.
standard? That's the standard where you amortize it over the life cycle of the facility. Is that what you're referring to? When you give us those, 4 and 8 cents?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
what I would say,
Okay.
yes.
Sorry.
And if I could follow that up, so if we're paying 14 cents a kilowatt hour, I guess everybody pays about the same thing from Rappahannock Electric. We'd cut our electric bill for most of the people, or could theoretically distribute electricity at 8 cents a kilowatt hour, which would cut everybody's electric bill by 50%.
Yeah, I think that's.
Well, it could, but remember, if you're doing it at a home or at a commercial site or industrial site where they're signing a contract for the power produced on their property, yes, you can save it. When it is sent onto the grid, you're not getting that. You yourself are not getting that benefit. The utility may be getting the benefit, and hopefully the regulatory commission is forcing them to shed that down to the ratepayer. But it's not always exactly what you're producing is what you'll get. So that's the other issue of the difference between doing it on your own property and you taking the power versus you just shoving it on power lines and letting the utility homogenize that power with other sources and give you a rate.
Are there hybrid models that you're aware of? I mean, because it seems like we're moving in that direction. I'm aware of some for like industrial campuses and that sort of thing. But are there models of and I know in other countries there are some like village systems and things there because they're detached populations. But in the U.S., is there a significant movement to go get somewhere between rooftop for your own use and going into the fully integrated grid? Is there much in between there?
By the way, that's a great question. Yes, over the last 5 or 6 years, there's several trends going on in parallel all over the United States and in some cases all over the world. One is community solar, meaning that an area wants solar for some reason. In some cases, they're living near mountains or tall buildings or forests, and their solar's blocked, or they have historic structures and they don't want to put it on the roofs. So they will orchestrate a piece of land that's near a power line. Sometimes it's given away by the city for $1 a year, sometimes a university, sometimes a corporate campus, and the solar is put on that property on the distribution line to the end users. And they sign a contract for the power. It's less than what you pay from the utility and for the daytime power, and that's called community solar, and in some cases community renewables. So that's one way to do it. The other way are microgrids. And in certain areas of the country where the power goes out a lot, both urban and rural, it's allowed to do almost the same thing. In this case, it's usually more blended with batteries. And so that, again, the power is shipped on the distribution line to, let's say, part of the county that's experiencing a lot of outages, so that they are paying lower power during the day, but have power day and night no matter what happens. And so, and I've done some work with food processors and other things, and data centers in Loudoun County and stuff like that, where they just can't go down. So, yes, and so, and then there's community choice aggregation, which is allowed in Virginia, where groups of customers can really aggregate and figure out how they're going to get their power. It could be a buying cooperative or a production cooperative, and you have the right in Virginia to do it. There haven't been many that have been done, but it's picking up a lot of interest lately. So yeah, there are different venues to do what you're talking about, and we're in the early stages of adopting them, but I have a whole PowerPoint presentation on them I'm happy to share with you.
Thank you for that. I guess I just want to leave that thought at least, or move that thought on the notion of remembering that this is a very rural, sparsely populated agricultural area. So does that typically involve, can that work when the distribution system is owned by utilities, or does that only is that limited to situations where the local user community can create essentially their own distribution system?
Well, usually you're not creating your own distribution system. You are allowed to. It's just like in the early days when we broke up AT&T, that the cellular companies and MCI and others can access the power line, the telephone lines and the cell towers. They just have to pay a fee to have access to it. So it's generally renting space on the power lines, not running your own directly, unless you're on a contiguous set of properties.
Yeah.
And it depends how large and small these are. So there's a lot of flexibility here. We're in the early stages of it.
Yeah.
And of course the utilities are scared to death of it because they don't want to lose customers. And of course a lot of customers are saying, well, we want certain attributes in our power. And it's not just green. It's 100% reliability. It's 100% clean power. Rural power has a lot of surges and fans and transients with digital equipment because of long runs of power lines. So there's a lot of reasons to do it, and the market is responding to that. So it's a very exciting time.
But that's not really what we're talking about here in our ordinances. We all love the idea of a microgrid, but what we're really looking at here is, people. We're in this draft ordinance. We're allowing on-site solar generation, but we're concerned with the impacts of somebody putting a utility scale solar production thing on their parcel, and that will go straight into the grid. That won't change our electric rates.
Correct.
That's not gonna.
What you just said is correct. What the language you're looking at is really looking at large scale solar systems tied to the utility grid, and what you're trying to do is limit the size on a particular piece of property and also the view shed on that property to the environment because it has impact on the character of the county. That's what you're looking at here, and trying to constrain a bit so you have some control of what projects might come online. Correct.
And on that note, if I may, so part of the concern, of course, would be that we, in our comprehensive plan, we spend a great deal of verbiage and intent on keeping ourselves a scenic and rural community. So that's where we're going to find the rub here. And so in terms of screening, is it feasible or possible to screen projects in such a way? A lot of our county is visible from trails in the Shenandoah National Park, and that's where a lot of our tourism revenue comes in, and that's where our businesses did well out here during COVID, not because we have better coffee out here than Arlington, but because people came out because it was rural and scenic. So is there a way to screen these in your experience so that from vantage points that are higher than that, it could be screened effectively?
I'm not sure could you rephrase the question? I'm not sure what the question is.
Yeah, so
Screen from outer space.
So the question is, can you screen it from, say, trails in the Shenandoah National Park or from heights? Is there you've mentioned before or I've read, some effective screening techniques. Are there effective screening techniques that would help screen it from heights like the Shenandoah National Park or the Skyline Drive?
Well, there are some companies, I'm just naming a company, it's called Eagle View, and they use satellites, and they can project what it looks like from the sky on land or on a building roof too. And they work with Google Maps. But yeah, there are a couple of ways that you can get a sense of how it would look from a distance and from different vantage points, yes.
Can you screen it, though? Is there some screening technique?
What do you mean by screening?
Make it less visible?
Oh, yeah. When I give guidance to counties, I pretty much demand, generally what a lot of the solar developers do is, you have to, in a large project, you level the land, right? You want the panels all to be even and to get the best output. And they haul the soil away. And I go, that's ridiculous. What you do is you berm the sides of the project, everything but the southern side, so that it has a giant hill made of soil. And then you plant barrier trees around it so that when you're running on a road, you don't see this massive, glaring thing on the roadway or from the distance. So yeah, you can absolutely create visual barriers to these projects, and I put some language in there to do that because I think there is it should be required. And by the way, I helped review a couple of manuals the Nature Conservancy has done on this to guide folks on these larger projects, so that you're reducing the view shed, you're maximizing biodiversity, you're ensuring there's no water or mud runoff of the projects. Absolutely. And of course, I'm also suggesting you raise it up a little higher so you can have animals of farming underneath or more biodiversity. So there's a lot of different ways to do this, and it's up to you.
Hello?
Yes, another question, Mr. Conley.
Hi, Dave Connick is my name, and I'm former chairman of the Planning Commission. I have a question about what you were just talking about and spoke of before, which is the sort of dual use where you put the panels up higher and you can still have animals graze under to use it for some other agriculture use. And I'm curious if you're familiar with the land use taxation program, which we have here adopted in Rappahannock and have since the 1980s. One of the debates or one of the discussion points on a lot of this is, and in some other counties, that if they convert their property from agriculture use to solar generation or renewable energy generation, they have to take it out of land use. So the county, first of all, gets a 5-year rollback tax collection for they have to pay back what they save, and second, from the time they start doing it and into the future, they don't qualify anymore for land use. So do you have any experience with how that would work? Because apparently, if that's a possible thing to do, is still use it for an agriculture purpose, theoretically, I guess they would still qualify for land use taxation.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's not the situation that is occurring in Shenandoah County. Shenandoah County, if you're in land use and put a solar field, your property's coming out of land use and you're paying rollback and you're paying regular
Yeah, but
taxes.
that's because they don't have what I'm suggesting. They don't have enviro photovoltaics. They're taking land out of production and putting it in solar. But I am suggesting you actually make it so that they have an option. They're not, by choosing solar, they're not saying that their land can go 100% out of use. They have a choice if they're a farmer.
Well, I guess my question is, do you know of a county in Virginia where that's been done and how it got treated for land use taxation purposes?
I don't know. I don't believe it hasn't been done yet. I'll check for you on that. I can send you a note on that. I know it's been done in North Carolina and in Pennsylvania and in Massachusetts and in Vermont. On the East Coast, and I don't know how they've treated that, but I will find that out, and I will see if there's anywhere in Virginia that they have agri-photovoltaics and they're doing that.
Thank you.
Couldn't that just be another category of land use, which would be a lot higher, use value, that would be a lot
Yeah.
higher?
I would suggest that, yes.
Well, it's not agricultural though, but I think that, couldn't, you spoke earlier about raising the panels and having livestock or some kind of farm operation going on beneath them. I think you wouldn't lose your land use then if you could keep it in some kind of farm use. But what would be the cost of raising these things up? And then how do you screen them?
Taller trees.
Did you hear that question? There was, I think it's,
I did not hear that question.
well, I think he's basic, it was a question, but I think his point is if you raise the panels, they're more visible and harder to visually screen.
You're only raising them a few feet, so no, they're not harder to visually screen.
And what did you call that, agri-portable? What was the term?
Agri-photovoltaics.
AG.
Meaning is if you're allowing, by raising the panels a few feet higher, it allows you then to tend to crops.
No, I got that. I got that.
Husband animals, or grow or just let
Oh,
biodiversity.
photo. Oh, I got you.
plants
Oh, okay.
prosper.
So it's agri-photo, what?
Voltaic.
Voltaic.
Voltaic. Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, photovoltaics are sunlight to electricity. That's the types of technology we're talking
Okay.
about. And agri just means it's allowing agricultural productivity under the panels.
Okay.
Mr. Fletcher, do you have another question, Paul?
Yeah, if I can remember, because I've been trying to listen to that, and I'm getting older. But here's what my real reason why I'm for, or so for, solar. I had 3 fields on my farm and 7 miles apart tested with this, real expensive test. I had to send it to a special guy place. And they all came back with heavy metals. I know pretty much what has happened on most of my farm in the last 100 years, or because we've owned the same piece of ground. I believe that the heavy metals have come from the coal-fired plants in the Midwest. I know our roofs in Rappahannock will rust out quicker and copper will go away because of the copper, because of the acid rain.
Yes.
Do you believe that to be true, that the pollutants from the Midwest and the coal-fired plants are coming to Rappahannock and
Well, I
possibly?
think it's not the Midwest. I think it's from West Virginia and Kentucky, right here, right on our border. And yes, and it just comes over the mountains and right down and deposits on the land. Absolutely.
So that's where the heavy metals have come on my farm.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And if we went to solar power, we wouldn't have any, there'd be less pollutants because there'd be no
No question about it.
coal-fired plants.
Well, yeah. I mean, I want you to think about something, and this is amazing. I didn't think I'd even be alive to see it. But 8 years ago, just 8 years ago, over 50% of our electricity in the United States came from coal. Now it's at 20% and farther. So it's going way down. And if we're able to enhance and extend solar, wind, geothermal, the water technologies, biogas, we can knock that down. And then we're not polluting the watershed and we're not polluting the air with all these fine particles that are full of very bad things. So, yes, it's polluting our farmland and our waterways. And we've got to, before we didn't have any choice, so you do what you have to do. But now that we have choice, this is how we've got to do it. And everybody's got to figure out what makes sense for them.
So what is environmental, if I may ask another question, Mr. Chairman? What is the negative environmental impact of a solar field?
The only negative environmental impact is to make sure, and you do this in your language, that there is a decommissioning requirement. So when the solar panels are ending their useful life, there is a process to retrieve them and recycle them so they're not in a landfill. That's basically the only issue. The big manufacturers of solar panels actually require you to sign something saying you will let them know and they will come and take it away. And that's good. But a lot of smaller companies don't do that. So it's up to the local governments to put language in there, in some cases have some bonding or some escrowing so that we don't have these orphan generation facilities and this stuff ends up in a landfill. You do not want that to happen. So, I mean, they're mostly glass and metal. I mean, but it's still a lot of stuff. And it's just like electronics. It's the same thing that's in stereo systems and cell phones. There's nothing too crazy.
Is there a possibility that stuff could be recycled?
Yeah, did you say recycle?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yes, we are in the midst of several different approaches to either recycling or repurposing solar panels, both here and in Europe, and in some of the largest manufacturer in the United States in solar and actually in the world. They're called First Solar in Arizona. They have a recycling plant for solar panels, and so we're gonna need to make those requirements very tight. And not have the same thing that the gas industry has with closed down fracking plants, for instance. So we've got to make sure that there is a place for this stuff at the end of its useful life. Now, I do have to tell you that I put my first solar panels on my home in 1984. So we're at 37 years and they're still running great. So it's not like they just die out. They maybe have less output over time, but they don't necessarily go dead. So some of these systems can last a very long time, but some don't. And if they don't, we've got to figure out a way to make sure that they don't get in landfills or just allowed to die on the land with nobody responsible for taking them down.
So the the benefits of renewable energy are certainly great, as Mr. Fletcher and others point out, and I'm 100% behind that. I think some of what you're saying may apply to on-site and rooftop development, but development in green agricultural and forested areas probably contains maybe a few other issues. For example, the Alliance for the Shenandoah Valley recommends things such as erosion. Erosion is a major issue in construction. So construction of these facilities is a big issue. I talked to the DEQ today, the Department of Environmental Quality, and one of the people I spoke with there said they get constant complaints so far, even in the small number of solar farms that they have out there so far in Virginia, about the developers have promised to do things about erosion but have not been able to necessarily follow up on it. So there's getting a lot of runoff because there's a significant amount of grading and clearing that often needs to be done. So for example, the Alliance for the Shenandoah Valley says you should have applicants demonstrate that they are minimizing grading, compaction, and creation of impervious surfaces. You should require maximum retention and replacement of topsoil. Topsoil should be removed from the area, should not be removed from the area to be graded, but it should be stored on the site and replaced after the grading is completed. Compression mats should be also employed to avoid compaction of soils, etc. And the Piedmont Environmental Council has pointed out the potential problem of what they're calling anticipatory deforestation, which would not apply necessarily on ag lands, but where people would be tempted because of the high dollar amounts involved to clear farmland, to clear forested lands that are being used essentially as carbon sinks right now, and then lease it for renewable energy. So they're asking the General Assembly to have a provision that requires that if forested land has been cleared more than 3 years prior, it can't be leased for renewable energy production. So
You mean less than?
if it's been clear in the past 3 years,
Oh, yeah.
they can't lease it. So they don't want people,
Right,
you know. So I think that when we're talking about a land area like Rappahannock County, where we have a lot of steep slopes, we have very minimal amounts of usable farmland, we have scenic vistas. I think environmental, I don't know whether you would call them environmental or just other concerns, but I think there are significant issues that are raised by, creating utility scale facilities. Would you say that, I've said that right, Mr. Sklar, or?
Yeah, I think there are some issues to do it. You don't want spur deforestation. But remember also, and I worked with the Nature Conservancy on this, all trees are not equal. So it may be that you have, they may have to hire an arborist to say, hey, these are, the trees that they are clearing out are dead or dying. Well, then probably make sense. If it is not and healthy and a certain density, it should not be allowed to be taken down. So I think there needs to be some texture and some flexibility, but overall, the goal should be, I think, to encourage solar on your own land. If it's larger parcels, utility scale, addressing it by limiting the percentage of land that could be covered, which is what's being suggested, and having some view shed attributes of this, and hopefully some biodiversity and the land approaches to it. I think you can, generally allow some of it without going overboard and getting it out of control.
Could you comment, thank you for that. As you know, we have a large part of our county includes the Shenandoah National Park and the view shed. And I'm wondering because of the federal subsidies and some of these other programs, are these larger scale facilities subject to the National Environmental Policy Act review because of any of that? Do you happen to know if these?
No, they're not, because they have no emission output. They don't impact water or air quality. And they don't have.
So visual alone doesn't trigger.
Visual alone does not trip that in there. But that doesn't mean that we need not to be aware of that. And I think you try to put it in your language. And there may be, I think the Nature Conservancy and the Wilderness Society might have some suggested language for you on that as well, to tighten that up. So when you're sitting there up on the Shenandoahs, you're not looking down on some glaring thing. And I agree with that. So there are ways to do it. Not everything in your county is seen from the top of the Shenandoahs. And depending on how these things are buffered, a lot of times you could pretty much block it. We're getting some wonderful skills with land use planners on buffering solar and in some cases wind farms, and we're learning a lot from it. So and quality of life is important. We want to enhance quality of life, not reduce quality of life, even if we're doing something green. So I hear you on that.
Thank you for that. I feel there's a growing set of questions. I guess I want to make sure that we're respectful of your time. I know, are you, I think we probably have a few other questions, comments queued up here. Are you still?
Yeah, you have me for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to have.
Okay, I'm going to prioritize.
Remember, you can send me questions by email.
Understand. I'm going to prioritize.
Turn it around very quickly.
I have one.
Thank you for that. I'm going to prioritize the commissioners and then a couple members of the public who have not yet asked a question, and then we'll go from there. So,
Okay,
yeah,
just one.
please.
Okay, so road access. What impact does a operating solar farm, regardless of size, have on road access? Is it like you need like a highway going into it, or is anybody accessing it, or what's the traffic on it typically?
Well, I mean, because it doesn't have moving parts and you have sensors and controls that are web enabled, you really don't need people going to it, every day or every week. I think once a month you probably, if you have a service contract in the projects I oversee, I generally require the service company to go once a month and eyeball the system, see if there are any animals, chewing wires or nesting on the panels. Once in a while, boulders fall down. I've seen parts of airplanes come down on solar panels, and you didn't realize you had some cracked panels. So it's always good to eyeball it once a month, but it's one or two people in a car. Not a big deal, and it doesn't require maintenance. So, that's what's sort of nice about these solar projects is it's not a lot of human intensity day to day once they're working.
So is it very taxing on a road to bring the panels in? Is that?
No, I mean, these are somewhat flexible trucks, the solar panels and the mounting hardware, and they're dropped on site, and then people come in and drop the footers into the ground, usually, so that, and then they sort of attach the grid, which they then bolt the panels down to. There are several different formats of it, but it's pretty fast, has no pollution or other issues really, and it's pretty easy.
But you saw the requirement of a 20-foot wide paved road. What would that be for?
Well, it's generally either to bring, there are a couple of heavy things to bring, which is the large inverters and in some cases the shipping containers for the batteries, for the battery banks. So that's probably what that's for.
Okay.
May I ask, a 1 megawatt field, let's say 10 acre, I think you said a 10 acres would handle a 1 megawatt field.
Yeah.
What size line does that need running down the road or across the fields compared to, say, 100 megawatt?
Well, I mean, that's up to the utility company, but 400 to 500 volt lines usually are the ones, for the giant ones, it's more than that, but it's really what's compatible with, it has to actually match what the transmission line that already is running over that piece of land is. That's really what determines the size.
Other questions from the commissioners? If not, I know, sir, you in the back had a question earlier. Do you still have a question you'd like to ask?
It probably will for the planning commission, but do you address or plan to address the restoration of these sites when these facilities are decommissioned? And how do you do that for bond?
Sure. Well, for those of you who weren't here in the beginning, note that we do have a draft ordinance language that's out for a public hearing at the July, an upcoming meeting jointly to be held between the Board of Supervisors and the Planning Commission. I think even as we agreed to put that language out for hearing, there was, I think, a pretty common recognition that we hadn't fully absorbed all of the aspects of this as we drafted that ordinance, and we were, still trying to learn, which is part of what led us where we are tonight with a work session and an invited expert. So we're in the middle of the process, but I think the short answer to your question is yes, there is language in there for the decommissioning requirements.
Yes, and I saw that too.
Yes, Mr. Fletcher.
It's my understanding that government's function is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community. And if I could ask you three real questions. Would this improve the health of the community versus the coal-fired plants where you getting electricity from now?
I'm sorry, I'm not going to make you answer that. I mean, that's not really a trade-off that we face. We don't have a decision to get rid of the coal. So, I mean, obviously that's the direction.
You don't go out because this is so much cheaper.
Understand. But do you have other questions for
all I'm asking is, people on the commission have been talking about the view shed and all. That's not a governmental issue. The health, safety, and welfare of the public are the government issues, as I understand.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would argue that the view shed is part of the welfare of our community and part of what we're trying to preserve in the tourism mechanism. But your point's well taken. Yeah, understand. Anybody have any other questions? If not, I want to give our guest more of his time.
I'd like to thank that gentleman. those.
Yes, I certainly would also, I think we'd all like to thank you. I know we had it was a little touch and go as to whether you were going to be able to make it tonight. I think you really added a lot where I was wondering how we were going to productively use our time tonight, and you've answered that question in spades. I greatly appreciate your indulgence and your patience and your expertise and your offer for us to follow up with additional questions. So
Absolutely. I hope to get tons of additional questions. I also have lots of studies and handbooks I'm happy to share, and I'm really impressed with how methodically you're going over and thinking this through. So thank you for your public service, and an honor to work with you. Thank you so much.
thank you.
Thank you.
I'm signing off now, and
All right.
I'll wait for any questions. Okay.
Terrific. Thank you very much. All right. Well, going back where we thought we were going in the beginning, I think we have had a chance to go around and express basic views. I guess, it is, what is it, 20 past 7? I set a deadline that we were going to try to wrap up by 8. But I do think we have some time if it's the pleasure of the commission to maybe, now that we've had this discussion, to walk through the draft ordinance and reflect on what's there and maybe get some reactions to that. Is that folks up for that?
I think the major thing here that I have a problem with is that when you look at the county where you got 20% of the county in scenic easement, you got another 20% of the county in the Shenandoah National Park, and then you apply the comp plan, and then you only look at parcels that are suitable for solar fields that are at least 500 acres in size, that you have excluded so much of the county, and you have gone down to a very few number of parcels, and probably the number of parcels, we don't even know what they are in Rappahannock County. And what struck me last month is when I brought this up to Gary Curry and went over this, I think, the third paragraph here on one of the pages, and basically said, based upon this criteria, it's exclusionary. There's no place you can build a solar field in Rappahannock County. And he smiled and said, well, we'll find some place. He basically agreed with it. So the whole approach here to this ordinance that we have is exclusionary of solar fields in Rappahannock County, and that is not the right approach to this.
Thank you. Your
And let the
comment.
minutes reflect that when Mrs. Ishii had it still before Mr. Whitson presents.
You remind me of something that might be also instructive. I don't know how much folks have had a chance to look at the Rappahannock Rapidan Regional Commission. Do you have that study possibly at your fingertips?
No, I can't put it on this.
Oh, you can't put it on this. I would draw your attention. I know there have been a lot of documents spread around, but one of the documents that I thought was sort of surprising to me was, am I right? It was the Rappahannock It was the RRRC that did that study of
The map.
the map. Yeah, and what they did is they did kind of what you're talking about, where they looked at areas that were off limits, likely because of sensitive resources, floodplains. Then they got rid of land areas that were too sloped, and then and then they looked at land areas that were thought to be sufficiently close to power lines, and they did kind of map some of those areas. And it was surprising to me to see that there were, and again, this is just a rough analysis, but it was the area along the up around North Pose Road and the big transmission corridor. There were some areas that were perceived as high probability, and then the other area was around Sperryville, which I guess catches the transmission line coming over and the substation there. Although I was a little puzzled by that because it seemed to include area that I would have thought would not have met the slope criteria. But I suppose if it was going down to the east of Sperryville, there would be perhaps some flatter land there. But I do think it's instructive because you actually get to a pretty small footprint before you even start applying any regulatory constraints, if you believe their assessment of the sort of economic feasibility
So
stuff.
then you take all that, if it's correct and done correctly. I know there's a tremendous amount of DOF land over on the Pose Road area along that Rappahannock watershed. So you take whatever's left, and then you look for 500-acre parcels within that area. And then you're down to a handful of people. So I think what we should look at in this is that possibly going back to a site size of 100 acres, and half the site size can be solar fields.
Yeah.
I think it has to be something more reasonable to deal with. And not make it so
Well,
exclusionary.
That was my question to Mr. Sklar, and I honestly don't know the answer to that. I did look at that map. I was surprised as well. I mean, I do think it's true that there are, I mean, it's just a fact of life. There are some areas that are not appropriate for developing renewable energy. There are areas that are appropriate for it and are great for it, and they should be developed there. Whether our small county with, as I said, the lack of prime farmlands, the steep slopes, and all the lack of transmission facilities is all that appropriate for it, that's very questionable in my mind. And then you add the scenic stuff on top of it, whatever people may or may not think of that, that's what our comprehensive plan tells us to do, is to protect our scenic resources. So it does make it tough. I'll be the first to say that's what it looks like. But I think while we can't prohibit it outright, what we can do is make standards that make it have to comply with our comprehensive plan, and protect wetlands, protect floodplains, et cetera, and guard against erosion. And if a developer comes in and can protect all those things, then okay, let's do it.
But you put the barriers so high, there's no way he can clear any of these barriers.
Just let me.
No, I'm being honest,
I know,
Gary.
but
I am being honest about
I
this
understand,
crap,
but
okay?
I'm gonna support you to let me.
Okay.
I think, Ms. Ishii, I can agree with you. None of that leads you to a 500-acre limit. You can do all those things and protect the visibility and those sensitive areas without a 500-acre limit. So I actually agree that I think a 500-acre parcel is limit is excessive, and I also don't support the a 20-year time limit. I mean, I do think those are disconnected to the issues that we're dealing with. We have a limited set of real issues here regarding visibility and soil properties and the like, and I don't see how a minimum parcel size of 500 acres is really contributing to that. I mean, it's really an economic factor, and I guess that's the other point about these maps. They're subject to a lot of uncertainty because they're driven by assessment of average economics, and B, as we've I think heard in spades tonight, this is a very dynamic industry, and the economics are changing very rapidly. So what's true today probably isn't going to be true a year, or certainly not 3 or 5 years from now. So I do think we need to be circumspect about how much we rely on the economics to dictate. But having said that, I still don't see that what the benefit of a 500-acre limit is.
Well, I would say my observation about the initial draft was, like Al said, it was intended to exclude it from the county.
Yeah.
And I don't think a 500-acre minimum lot size, or maybe there shouldn't even be a minimum acre lot size. Maybe there should be a maximum percentage of a holding that could be in like 20% or whatever that might be. So that your typical farm does not have to abandon farming. It simply takes 20%, so let's say 20% on 500 acres would be 100 acres. They could generate significant income and still farm.
Yeah.
But the other aspect of this that I think we may be overlooking is maybe in that type of formula, there would be some basis for requiring that those parcels not be divided while they're a solar farm. So if you have a certain acreage required, that's a conservation kind of overlay where you don't make say if you're allowed 20% or 25% or whatever, and you use that, then you don't then immediately sell off all the land and leave just the solar farm.
Right.
So there could be a conservation side benefit to it.
So Mr. Sharp, you're probably the largest landowner in Rappahannock County on the Planning Commission right now. So congratulations. There's nobody here that has more acreage than yourself. And your farm up there where you're located,
It's in easement.
but if it
so-
wasn't an easement, it is an easement, so you're not gonna get a panel
Right.
for commercial use. But if it wasn't an easement, you're in a very unique location up there, I just thought. that
Well, no,
for a
I
second.
have 30 that's not in easement.
Well, if the whole thing was not, let's take a hypothetical for a second. The whole place was not. Now, you're outside Little Washington, and, is your property completely within a view shed of Skyline Drive?
Possibly,
Can
yeah,
you see the whole property?
maybe.
Maybe, maybe not, maybe
Well,
towards
because
the,
we can look at and overlook,
from your house.
yes,
But
well,
if you-
from most of the property.
But down along the stream and maybe a little bit too up the holler, isn't it areas there that would not be in the view shed?
Could be, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are.
But if you had 25 acres or 20 acres and it wasn't a VOF, would it be nice for you to have 20 acres there that you could count on, $28,000 check every year? Would you
Could.
like that?
Yeah, I prefer that.
Yeah, okay.
Well, and I think the point I'd like to visit also, I mean, prior to the discussion tonight, what I had been reading about is, it's kind of interesting, the conventional wisdom is cows are too big, they knock over the panels, goats climb up and break the panels or try to eat them, but sheep are really compatible with the panels. And I hadn't heard about this idea of making them higher and doing cattle grazing, I think is a very interesting and possibly innovative approach that really could actually contribute to our agricultural mindset and our desire to make agriculture viable in some way. So, I think we've got a lot more to learn on that. I wonder how feasible that is. I can imagine a lot of other challenges of putting these things up higher, and it's hard to believe the cows wouldn't mess with them in some way. But yes, Mr. Fletcher, you want to comment?
I'm curious of one thing, you all are talking about prime agricultural land. I'd like to know if anybody on this panel knows how much of Rappahannock is prime, or an estimate of what the prime agricultural land is. We don't have Fauquier loam in this county. We aren't like Culpeper and Fauquier. In fact, most of the lands are taxed higher than their value would be by agricultural value. So when you say prime agricultural land, I'm wondering what percentage would you consider prime agricultural land in this county?
I would, yeah, there is a map in the comp, I don't know the percentage,
You've got all
but
these qualifications.
I don't have it memorized, like it's a map, so I think I figure it out, but I don't know, I'm gonna say maybe 10-15%.
it's pretty small, but I think the unfortunate conflict is the better soil tends to be in the lower, flatter areas, which is also the ones where you might want to put the panel. So I do think it's not a panacea in that respect.
I'll just tell you my personal experience. I talked to a solar guy, and he's putting it on a 20-degree slope for my house.
Well, I noted also that Mr. Clark said that typically you come in and you grade it out. And so it's all at the same angle and the same level. You've pretty much destroyed those soils if you do that, if you're ever going to go back, or if you're going to use them for anything else. So
I think it's flat or south facing, but yeah, I do think there is and again, I think this is another area that, and frankly, if we go back to the language of the ordinance, I don't recall that we had kind of soil protection provisions in here. That to me is something that maybe we should be contemplating enhancing, in my opinion. I think that would be
I can't
sensible.
believe, I'm shocked when he said that. And I heard about this Spotsylvania site, and I heard about how many, they got like 20 big cats down there prepping that site. From my experience in Shenandoah County, I'm surrounded by properties that go in solar fields. My property's in easement, of course, I'm not going. So I'm witnessing everything that's happening, and and nobody knows I'm in easement. So I get all the letters soliciting my property for easement, for the fields. And I found that these solar people, they want to spend the least amount of money as possible. And there's enough territories in Virginia, and there's enough wide open areas where, in terms of like ordinances, no ordinances, that you can find a pretty flat piece of land where you don't have to spend $20,000 an acre making it flat. And now where I'm at over there, it's a rolling countryside. And between now and the next meeting, I would hope that some of these commissioners could drive by Turkey Knob Road between Mount Jackson and Shenandoah Caverns. And it's about a half a mile west of the Marilat factory, which is right there on 81, that you can see the Marilat factory. There's a big solar field there, and they use these kind of blue-green panels. They did a retention pond to runoff about twice the size of this room, and everything else, I have to say, I'm shocked at how non-intrusive it is. And if you look from 81, you can actually catch about a 5-second glimpse of it from 81. But if you get off the road and go these coordinates I mentioned, you can see it, and you can pull over, pull off the road, and you can study it and look at it. Like you said, there's nobody there. The worst thing that was going on during construction was there was some dust being created, and there was a lot of plastic bags that I guess components were in, and they got dropped or blown out of the trash bin or whatever. And it went on to adjacent farms. But other than that, you know, it was not a horrific experience for any of the neighbors there. But I think that would give some education to what we're talking about and what the impact could be.
Yeah, I do think it's tough to talk in generalities, especially when you start talking about the national average, when you're talking about Arizona and California at the same time you're talking about Virginia, and you're talking about, you know, Eastern Shore farmland compared to Rappahannock farmland. I think we do need to be careful not to overgeneralize these things for sure. And I think someone would be in for a pretty rude awakening if they thought they had to level the land here in order to put panels in unless you're in a real, you know, bottomland somewhere. But anyway, other comments, thoughts?
I'll say that there are going to be, and Mr. Mackler, if you want to take something from the public first, it's okay with me.
Sure.
I just want to say, 4 years ago or whatever, we were up in Vermont on vacation or whatever, and we don't travel the interstates or whatever, we travel the back roads. Vermont is covered with solar panels in agricultural areas. I mean, very, same as Rappahannock. You drive down the road, they're out there, they may be fenced off if they're running cattle, but if they're running sheep or whatever, the sheep are grazing in there and everything. They're low level, view shed wise, you really don't notice them that much. I mean, it's, they're there, but it's a field and it's not offensive or anything. And by comparison with, and this is technology also, is that, we worry about the view shed from the park and everything. But during hay season now, hay bales are covered with white polyurethane. They look like big giant marshmallows sitting out in the fields. So you're up on the drive and you look down and you see all these white marshmallows all over the place. I don't think anybody's offended by that or whatever. A solar panel is dark colors and it's no different. And I don't understand the emphasis on view shed, in that it's something we have to have. We look, the power poles are all out there. That doesn't seem to be a problem. They've just raised all the power poles in the county when they're replacing them. Nobody said a thing. But if we want to put a low-level solar field in or whatever, that suddenly becomes a problem. I don't understand the comparison.
Thank you for that. And again, apologies for the haphazard way I'm running the meeting, but I wanted to take comments from the public, but I guess maybe I'll take a more formal opportunity. I know several of the folks in the public have had an opportunity to speak, but are there other members of the public who'd like to make brief remarks? I would appreciate that we don't get into long speeches, but if anybody else would like to comment, I would certainly welcome the public to make comments. Anybody else want to speak? All right. Well, commissioners, other thoughts?
If I could. So on the agro photovoltaics, I appreciate Mr. Sklar's enthusiasm and optimism for it. What I have read and what I have heard from farmers and others is that sheep are a possibility. Growing crops underneath is optimistic at best. There are concerns. You can raise them so that wildlife can go back and forth underneath them. If you've got a huge fence around the property, I don't know what that does for wildlife corridors, but so you're fencing the property off and taking it out of wildlife use. I will say, I'm again on the erosion issue. That's encouraging to hear what our fellow commissioners have to say about. With their experience in erosion control, I have seen a lot of concerns expressed about erosion during construction. That's been in every single document I've read and every single person I talked to. I did speak with a person in Spotsylvania County, and there's a picture for those who want to see what it looks like on a larger scale. There is a picture on the PEC website, the Piedmont Environmental Council website, of the Spotsylvania farm. That is a huge farm, but it's very visually impactful, I would say. Now, if you have a smaller one, you can probably screen it, so it's not so much. But I did have, and I'll be happy to share it, I pulled out one of the things that concerns me about the language that we have is that it puts a lot of these principles out there about protecting the viewshed and so forth, but I think it would be helpful both for the county and for the applicants, frankly, to have some more specific criteria. And some of the things Mr. Curry sent us did have specific criteria, things like how you preserve the soil when you do the construction, and a variety of other very specific things that I don't think are onerous so much as just clear. And I think that would be helpful and make people feel more comfortable. So I'll hand this out for folks to consider. But I don't know, Mr. Light, based on what you've said, it sounds like I don't know where we go with any of our concerns or ideas, because the language that Mr. Curry has advertised is what's going to go to the public hearing. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. And thank you for bringing us back to the practical realities. I mean, in my experience, I have a feeling, what we're going to get, the public input that is most opposed to the language as we put it out there, which is fine. If you put out something that's lenient, the people who want something more conservative are going to complain. If you put out something conservative, the people who want something more lenient are going to complain. But I mean, this is a good discussion. I think that this has been constructive tonight. Obviously, what we have before us is a hearing. I was a little concerned, that we didn't treat this language as though it were just somehow a straw man, but it's far from settled. I think from the discussion we've had this evening and prior to tonight, I think that's fairly clear. What I would recommend is, if you, based on whatever your discussion tonight or your own thoughts, if you want to put forward specific changes to the language, I think the public is likely to do that, and we're going to get general feedback. And I'd say there's a pretty low likelihood that we're, at least in my opinion, I would hope that we wouldn't try to finalize the language at this next meeting. That we are, going to take advantage of the public input and the hearing process. So I do think there's time. That doesn't mean it's going to be any easier to get consensus. Obviously, we've got, even among the, 6 of us, a pretty wide set of views, and I'm afraid this is going to be one of those issues, because there are some trade-offs along the way. But I think I'm open to conversations about specific language. I don't think that would be particularly productive tonight, but I would encourage all of us to revisit the actual language and, put your thoughts in the form of edits to the current language, because I do think it's important that you recognize that that is the starting point. That is out there, it has been made public, and anything that we do or change, I think, needs to be in the context of revising that draft as it exists. So I would encourage us all to look at that.
But we can make it less restrictive than what is advertised.
Absolutely, yes.
What's adopted.
I was under the impression, perhaps wrong, that the supervisors wanted us to come forward with whatever modifications we thought would be appropriate at the next meeting with them.
At the next meeting with
Well, when
them?
we meet with them.
Yeah. Well, you can speak to the will of the supervisors. We have to advertise something to have the hearing, and
Well, I know
that's been
we
done.
have to bring this forward.
Yeah.
But I think, I thought they were looking for any changes that we wanted to recommend that would come, that would be considered. It seems like there's a big push to get this on the books. And I'm not for or against that necessarily. I'm just trying to get the job done, if that's what.
Well, if you'd like to move to start proposing language changes that you think you're going to get voted on by this commission, feel free.
Well,
But
what's so amazing here is all of a sudden this became a hot potato. We've got to do something right now, and this was thrown on the table, and Gary wrote this here with these very stringent things on it. And now here we are tonight for a work session, and how many supervisors are here with us?
Well, we're gonna have a joint meeting next
Well,
week.
this is still our continued meeting.
Well, but
It's not a work
still, I
session.
mean, how many supervisors are here with us?
I withdraw the motion.
So,
You all need to study it more.
yeah, we don't need
Well-
to.
Well, I'm sorry.
The supervisors can put their fingerprints on this a whole lot too. I mean, we talked about this gentleman here tonight, fantastic, well balanced both ways. There's a lot to think about, to reconsider this. And I've said at the last meeting, there's no need to rush into this. We need to do it right. And I think, this is an important environmental thing. It's solar energy is going to be part of the cure for air pollution and health-wise. It's for the people, and this is going to be something that impacts the country for the next multi-generations. So,
And I think we can be the greenest county in Virginia very easily without the planning commission.
so, just
I think you're right,
let's
Mr.
keep
Chair.
this from getting too far. I don't want this to spin out here. We have a hearing. We have a very clear process. We have moved to have the hearing. The draft language has been advertised. Having the hearing doesn't tie our hand to vote to move anything forward. The supervisors could take it out of our hands, as has been noted. I don't think they will do that. I think they will defer to us, but I think, so, yes, there's pressure to get this done, but I think there has been a healthy recognition that this is a bit more complicated than we originally thought. And, I think I encourage all of us to try to move things forward that they think can get a vote. That's how we move things. I mean, if people want to try to modify the language through a motion and, they can get seconded and pass a recommendation, we can do that tonight. We can do that at the next meeting, and I'm guessing we'll have the opportunity to do that at the meeting after that, based on what I'm sensing around this issue.
Could I understand what the issue is? Right now, there is nothing in our ordinance relating to solar. Is that correct? There's nothing.
Well, I think
Electrical generator.
there's electrical generation, so there's a question as to, whether you would face the, I mean, one argument is you'd have no easier time citing a solar power plant than a coal power plant under the current ordinance, but I'm not sure that's entirely the case, because that's sort of a ridiculous outcome. But also, we have language in the comprehensive plan that, again, not legally binding as the ordinance, still somewhat protective. So I think there's questions as to the level of vulnerability or to the extent to which our pants are down, as some of us often like to ask or suggest. So, we're better served when we have a solid ordinance, and, I think we're best served when we have something that at least as many of us as possible are comfortable with, but we're not going to get anywhere without something that a majority of the supervisors is
Okay,
comfortable with.
now, as a stopgap, and I don't know, I know this is probably a really off-the-wall kind of idea, but my understanding is some localities in Virginia have a category of special exception, which is uses not provided for in the ordinance. That's what I was told. I consulted with an
Do
attorney.
we have?
I consulted with an attorney about that, a land use attorney.
Yeah, I don't
Who said
question that.
that
I'm
is-
wondering. I'm actually wondering if we have any such thing that would apply
No, I
here. I
don't
don't.
But
Have it, but that would open the door to a whole lot
Well,
of
no,
other
but
things.
it also would require any,
Nuclear waste dumps and.
it would require any use to apply for a special exception. So that would cover this
What?
particular.
Well,
What does that buy us?
you raise a good point, and
It
this.
has to come before the Board of
Well,
Supervisors.
so with this language.
No, but I'm saying if we're not able to do this.
Well, even our current ordinance would require them to be, because they have to get a special exception.
Yeah.
With
So
no ordinance, you really don't have a lot to stand on.
well, part of
You
this.
have to look out for the public safety, the,
Well,
Character
currently, they
of
have
the
to go
county.
to get a special exception
all
for
of
any
those
electrical generating, yeah.
Part of what we're up against here is the same question that Ms. Ishii brought up earlier. Personally, I don't agree that more specificity is better, because the more specific you are, the more quickly it becomes obsolete. And I think, we're appointed and supervisors are elected and BZA members are elected to use their heads and to apply judgment. So personally, I think that we don't need everything to be formulaic in the ordinance. But until it is, we only have the general standards that we can apply, and that does make it far less clear and transparent. So I think what we're talking about here is ultimately trying to put more specificity and make this a more predictable and a transparent process, so that applicants will have a better idea of the likelihood of what they're thinking about being approved.
Could I respond to some of that? I appreciate that very much, Mr. Light. I think if I recall what occasioned this is a couple of things. The sense of urgency is that we have just in December passed a comprehensive plan that had, pages, a page and a half at least, if not more, of admonitions about protecting the county in cases of renewable energy development. And we had ordinance language that, if I recall, was proposed. In fact, it was provided here as part of the May amendments. And we felt at that time we didn't have adequate time to address all the questions, so we didn't do it. However, one of our supervisors, at least, has brought up the concern that because there are now, with this new renewable energy portfolio standard that's been passed in Virginia, there are a number of applications in not only Rappahannock County, the potential, but in other counties. And we have all been aware that in other counties, they have approved, because they've had pressure to approve it, utility scale solar projects that they've come to regret already, and now are scrambling to try to figure out what kind of parameters they ought to put around it. That's what we're trying to do, I think. And so, that doesn't mean we have to exclude everything. That doesn't mean there may be not some landowners that would be appropriate. But bear in mind, like every kind of zoning thing that we do, there are going to be winners and losers. Not everybody in this county is going to be able to put up a renewable energy utility scale project on their land. There have to be parameters around it. So there is a sense of urgency to get something on the books, I think. We're responding to the request from the board, and I would say, in response to what you just said, Mr. Light, about specifics, we don't want to get so specific that it's going to be outdated, but I think addressing specific soil erosion issues like we do in our stormwater ordinance or like we do in our cell tower ordinance doesn't outdate it necessarily, but to expect either the planning commission or the board to know how to draft, when an application comes in, specifics on, setbacks from riparian buffer areas is probably not gonna happen. We won't have the time or the expertise to do that. So other counties do have this. They're working on it. They're preparing it. I know that Augusta County and Southampton County have both drafted ordinances and do have specific standards. I did not have the time to look at those, but maybe others could, or we can before next week. But yeah, I do think we ought to be taking this seriously and make some decisions about whether and to what extent our county is appropriate for this kind of development. Because these things do last for 20+ years, and that's not minor.
No arguments here, and I don't think arguments from others. I think it's, we can all kind of put out straw men and whack them down on either extreme on this, and I think it doesn't go anywhere. We're under time pressure, but what we need to do is come up with something that we agree on sufficiently to move it forward. And until we do, the discussion about time pressure is it's real and it's always there, but the time pressure is to do something that we can get behind in sufficient numbers to approve. So, I think we're, there's a lot of, I think we're all kind of coming at this from slightly different perspectives, but it's all, everything everybody's saying is true. We still have to move some very specific language in order to get the job done.
So how are we gonna do that?
Well, we have a hearing, and we are educating ourselves, and we are opening opportunities for commissioners to propose changes, just as we're going to open up the possibility for the members of the public to propose changes. And I'm open to other suggestions. I just think we can't imagine ourselves to agreement on this. So I don't know. Do you have something you'd like to recommend?
From what I can say, from what I hear, it sounds like we don't have an opportunity much to amend language now that we've put this out for public hearing and we come prepared to next joint hearing next Wednesday with any proposed changes, and we would vote on them like a regular meeting. Is that what I hear?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's that's what the sausage making has created here for us, and it might be easier if it had been different, but this is kind of what happens when we run into these things. I mean, I do think we have a solid starting point, and we have something now that we're all able to react to, and personally, if we got rid of the 20-year limit and adjusted the acreage size and perhaps made sure that we had some of the decommissioning and soil and biodiversity stuff in there, I don't think we're necessarily that far from something that enough of us could support that we could move forward. So, I mean, there's you can always look at the part of the cup that's empty or the part of the cup that's full. We have to have a hearing one way or another, and hopefully we'll learn something more, both technically and in terms of public sentiment at our hearing. Yes, sir.
Ms. Light, I think if I can be so bold as to make a suggestion, and I'm pretty bold.
What if I said no? No, just kidding.
I'd keep talking.
I figured.
But, the supervisors, if you're gonna have a joint meeting, the supervisors, they're gonna have to listen to this gentleman talk again, and they're gonna have to get this gentleman, they're gonna have new questions and more questions, and the community, if it's reported by any of the various news organizations, everybody's gonna know that this ordinance is no good. It ain't gonna fly. A dog don't hunt. So why go through that? Why waste 8 hours of your valuable time and all the members of the commission? Why don't you just withdraw the notice or cancel the notice?
Yeah, I don't think
I
that's
think it
what
would save you all time and long run.
Can I-
Isn't it that you have, I mean, I just think this, isn't it that you have to advertise the worst case scenario? And you can make it less at that public hearing.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
no, that's true, but I think, to your point, that train, using metaphor, that train's left the station, I believe. I believe the hearing has been noticed. I mean, we could cancel it, but that would certainly not expedite things. And, I don't think we could unilaterally cancel it because it was the supervisors who sort of put this forward to begin with, so.
I think they all resigned.
Yes, ma'am.
So is there any requirement that you have to vote on this after the joint meeting, the public hearing? There's not, is there? Can you
No.
not just continue it and continue to study it?
We can, subject to the pain and suffering inflicted on us by those who point out that we're not getting anything done. And, that's usually a pretty strong incentive. But you're right, I mean,
You're directing that at me, I'm,
oh, no, not at all, please.
which, go ahead, you can do that, but as the press, I would, take off my press, my personal preference would be to do it right rather than do it quickly.
I think that's
And I would
generally
imagine
accepted.
that sentiment could be, echoed by the rest of the public.
Yeah.
So hopefully, we'll have the joint meeting next week. Hopefully, Mr. Carey will be there. Hopefully, Mr. Goff will be there. Hopefully, the public will be there in a good number. We can get comments from them. And hopefully, we'll have some good common sense exchange. And then changes will be done. Move forward to August. Talk about those changes jointly. And maybe another advertisement of the thing in September or October.
We could still look at it in July.
You don't have to advertise it.
We could still have it at the
Let's make it
planning
strict.
meeting in July.
I mean, the point of the matter is, we have a process. I totally agree with you. I mean, everybody wants you to do it quickly, but only if you do it quickly the way they want you to do it. So, I mean, we have to do it right, and we have a process for doing that. And, I would hope that with the press account of this meeting, and for anybody who's looking at the recording or listening to this, that this discussion tonight will generate some more engagement from the public, and that's what this process is about.
I think it's left up to how fast the supervisors want to do something.
That's
If
right.
they want to take next month, do some edits and move on with it, they can, whether or not we feel it's ready or not.
That is
They
true.
can vote, they're welcome, they can vote on it next week if they want.
So, and hopefully there's enough supervisors that want to do this thing right, and we can work on it for the next couple of months. I mean, how many years did we work on the comp plan before we got it done?
Well,
Let's not go there.
They may wanna, they may
If we're
wanna
talking
put
a month or
something.
two, I mean, more. I mean,
Yeah, we have a lot of room. We have a lot of room by that standard.
A few corrections to this thing and a few modifications could at least give us something that's reasonable on the books, which can be amended at any time, and we can get it working on it and have maybe we've got something. But that's gonna be their choice.
Agreed, but I think it's incumbent on us to try to make those changes, and I think this discussion is helping to drive this forward.
Can
So
we continue this discussion to our next meeting, our next regular meeting?
I don't know that we need to do that. We have
Or
another
leave it
meeting.
open, we might.
Well, so what we have right now is
Yeah.
go ahead.
What's that?
We have a hearing on the
Yeah,
7th,
hearing
so we
next
don't
week.
need to continue this meeting. That meeting's already noticed and is
Okay.
on the books. So I believe, and I think we're fast approaching the time that I'm going to recommend that we adjourn for tonight. But parting thoughts?
I'll make that motion.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second it.
Uh,
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much.
I take your cue very easily.
Yeah.